Good morning and welcome to Policy Committee for Frederick County Public Schools on Wednesday, April 14th, 2021. Joined today by Board Member David Bass in person and Board Member Liz Barrett by phone. At this point, we're going to go to public comment, and I do not believe that any public comment has been submitted for this meeting. So we will move on to 1.03, a copy of Wednesday, March 24th, 2021's meeting minutes. Do I have a motion for approval of those minutes? Motion. Moved by Mr. Bass. Seconded by Mr. Young. All those in favor? Liz, are you there?
Yep.
You in favor?
Yes.
Okay, passes unanimous. All right, next up, 1.04, Policy 516 is the teaching of controversial issues and the use of historical artifacts. And Ms. Cannon, I know you have a number of comments of what's gone on since the last time we've had it here, so if you want to bring us up to date.
Dr. Buckner, and then the Racial Equity Committee. So
Right.
That was posted and available for the Racial Equity Committee. No new public comment was received. And I thought it was important to start there because I asked Colleen Bernard and Eric Phillips, as they have been on this journey in reviewing and developing this policy from the beginning, which started September 23rd, 20, let's really consider this public comment. Would we make some changes? And it seemed like there were two primary changes. One was the recommendation maybe to consider a title change. The other was to get a little bit more detail in the training that was offered. And also to identify that the definition of classroom can be virtual or in person. So we met, and I really want to thank them because there was, a short period of time to look at this and consider it. And so yesterday, we did send to the policy committee and we posted our recommendations in purple. That was to show and to signify that we did read all that public comment, and as a staff, we would say, there was some really good public comment and some good suggestions. And so we looked at, because there was a real balance of input that we received. And so that would be the new document that we posted relative to identifying some of those public comment recommendations. And I don't know if you want to start there or have a conversation relative to some of those recommended edits.
That is fine. So we have the addition under the policy statement of potentially and current events. So that's fine with me. Any comments on that?
And the reason, too, we said teaching of potentially controversial issues versus just teaching, of a historical thing is because we really felt it was important. The topics can be controversial, and controversial is not always a bad thing. That
Right.
does create critical thinking, but we also talked a lot about wanting to communicate this policy is for all teachers, not history teachers. And so that was some of the reason why we wanted to preserve the integrity of the title, but we're also comfortable making that modification in purple to the title.
I want to acknowledge I may be looking at an older document, and so, okay, thank you.
And I had sent it to you, David, in an email yesterday, and then we posted it on Board Docs. And I know that our internet's been a little tricky, but now, Brad, do you want Faye to make you,
Okay.
another copy?
Thank you, Catherine. Liz, did you have any comments?
No, not specifically about the title area.
Okay.
Yeah. So just looking at the title area then, the idea then of changing it to teaching of potentially controversial issues, use of historical artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's an improvement. I do.
Okay. All right.
And then we made a corresponding change in the policy
Just
statement.
adding in potentially and also adding in current events. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I mean, there was the idea of adding, that have multiple perspectives. Is there thought about adding that language?
Well, that is within the definition of a controversial
Yeah.
issue, and we tried to take out controversial and replace it with multiple viewpoints, and it gets very, I think it could deviate into what it really is, because if you think there's a topic that we can have multiple viewpoints, and then there's a topic that could be controversial, we kind of saw that maybe changing and modifying that definition in a way that maybe it wasn't intended, and you kind of trip over the words if you look at changing controversial to multiple viewpoints every time. So we thought that because it was within the definition, it seemed to work best there. And then incorporated it as part of the training as well.
Yeah. Ms. Bernard, wouldn't it be implicit that in any subject that would be considered, particularly in the social sciences, that multiple viewpoints, there'd be an expectation that that would always be there?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the question is, again, whether it's implicitly there or whether you want it specifically stated. And I'm fine with the way it is because I think that is my expectation that you would do that. So I don't need to have it stated, but that's my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, in my notes on the policy, I was considering whether the sentence would be stronger. That in the middle of policy statement, in the middle of number 2, that they often encounter issues that may be considered controversial or have multiple perspectives. So I just wonder if there would be value in adding that or have multiple perspectives.
And what sentence are you looking at in the policy statement, Mr. Bass?
I think the one that starts with the board encourages the examination of potentially controversial issues. I think, and that's where you're saying then,
So the
or
board
ones that have multiple perspectives. Is that what you're looking at?
I was looking earlier.
Earlier, okay.
The board also recognizes that as students prepare for effective citizenship, they often encounter issues that may be considered controversial or have multiple perspectives, both from the past and the present.
Okay.
What if we were to just pull the definitional language in there instead of or? Because that could take us again in that different direction where we say maybe consider controversial.
So David, I
Pos-
think, go ahead.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Possibly having multiple significant opposing viewpoints
So
and
I-
multiple perspectives.
And I'm not sure I'm confused at what you're getting at because I think, I mean, this policy is dealing with things that have, could be potentially controversial. Every subject that may have, there may be subjects that have multiple perspectives that aren't controversial. So are we trying to encompass both, or is that something that should be somewhere else? Or are you specifically talking about controversial issues that have multiple perspectives?
Specific to this policy, specific to controversial issues, I think it's a way that we can either deepen understanding, to acknowledge there can be multiple perspectives.
So, and again, remember, in policy, we're trying to be up here and then allow regulation to get down to the nitty-gritty. So, I mean, I guess, again, it's how much you want to put in there. To me, that's implicit. Every controversial issue is probably going to have multiple perspectives, and they should be explored, and I expect that. So whether you want to have that stated in the actual policy or not is I guess, the issue, because I would expect that underneath the policy and the regulation, Ms. Bernard's going to talk about that you have to have those kinds of things that are there, and so.
Well, it is. It's in both the
Right.
definition and then also how we handle it in the classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's, yeah, let's continue. Let's hear, so you're saying using the definition of controversial issue in number 2 would be helpful? Is that,
If we're going to make a change there, I would recommend that we use the definitional language instead of the or else it's a this or that versus this is what it is.
I think that's fine.
Ms. Barrett, what's your perspective?
I'm here. I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time with my brain and my phone. I think what I hear is that folks are having trouble with the definition of controversial issues, and I think there are multiple perspectives for the way that's defined, and I think we need to think about maybe solving the issue with. I know that in training and in regulation, you guys would probably use scenarios-based examples. And I think that might be where the disconnect is, because I do think that, like, for example, when I look at the comments from the Racial Equity Committee, I think I see where they want to be, which is, how is this going to play out? And are we putting enough detail and specificity in the policy that when it gets to regulation and training, that it will be able to be implemented with our intent? And so I'm not sure I know exactly how to solve those issues right now in the policy, but I do think if we think about the definition of controversial issues and maybe put a little more meat on that, I don't know.
Well, and I will share with any new policy or reg, we will often come back a year after implementation and say, we've had a year with it. We've been training. Here's some recommended edits to both policy and reg that we would make. And so I guess, too, we now can't forecast every possible thing, but I do agree with Ms. Barrett relative to the details and the intent. It will then be executed through regulation and through training.
Right.
And so we could certainly schedule this for an annual review next year after taking it out for a test drive for a year. And I think that would be good to, to do anytime with a new policy. And we often see that with a new policy and reg.
Mr. Lowers Phelps?
Thinking about what Mrs. Bernard stated there, the last part of the sentence that was being discussed, it says, they often encounter issues that may be considered controversial, both past and present. After that, we could add the definition language where it says past and present, where there exists significant opposing viewpoints and or multiple perspectives.
I think that clarifies it.
That works?
Yes. I think that's
Got
good.
it.
Thank you, Dr. Lowers Phelps. All right, one note that in item 1 purpose, there is the addition of the number 1, which states that for the purposes of this policy, teaching is interpreted to mean teaching either in a virtual or in-person classroom setting, which has been added obviously due to the pandemic and the fact that we're doing both. So that's wants to be stated implicitly there that that implies to both.
Yeah.
Okay?
Thank you, Brad.
All right, then the next changes are under compliance.
And this was feedback that we received, I think, from all 3 sources, was that, as far as delineating some expectations, with training. So we did that both, and Dr. Phillips and Ms. Bernard both gave feedback relative to this, as they are now developing and envisioning the type of training that we will be doing. And that's why, too, we hope to have this adopted perhaps in May, if at all possible, because we would like to execute training for some teachers before the end of the year and then administrators over the summer, if at all possible. So I really, they actually gave me the input relative to the training as we envision it. And I think it's broad relative to the compliance and the policy. But if you look at when you're doing training on the policy and the reg, it is meant to capture each and every one of the details, the expectations. That's when you really put what I'd call the nuts and bolts to the training. And when you say we're going to train on this policy and the reg, and I think that the policy and the reg do a very good job capturing the past and the present, based on the age appropriateness, based on ensuring students are critical thinkers, et cetera. And so that's not just fluff language, that is a lot of detail when you think we're going to train on the details of the policy and the reg. There is a lot to that.
I think that's an improvement. I support, yeah, that language and under compliance.
Any question, this is just a wordsmithing one, is instead of such, could it be this?
Okay.
I'm not a big lover of the word such.
Okay. Thank you.
But other than that, I think it encompasses what the intent in the
Okay.
comments were. Okay, and then the final one was the addition of number 5. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was then and then just a small little thing in the legal reference.
Right, I think that was the same as the
Yeah.
one before.
So yeah, those were all the changes that we recommended, but certainly we're here to answer any questions or would welcome any other additional suggested edits from the policy committee.
I think you've done a great job of incorporating the comment. And I do want to point out, and this is important, that we do take public comment and input seriously, and this is a great case where public comment came from several sources, and those were incorporated and used to make this a better policy, and that's what policy committee is to do. Sometimes we know what we want to do, but sometimes putting it in words is tough, and so I think, again, when the public has comments that they think will make something better, whether it be the Racial Equity Committee, citizens like Mr. Beninsky, former board member, or anybody, when you send them in, we do read them, we do look at them, and we try to incorporate them to improve our policy. So I think it definitely worked well.
Thank you. And so at this point, I would just look for direction, because you can see on the front of the policy that we were at the finish line relative to adoption. Do we want to go back there? Do you feel like we need to bring it back for another first reading, or can we put it on consent for approval, recognizing that we certainly would be willing to come back next year and revisit if we feel like, we've learned some things through training or have additional feedback. But I guess, too, we're looking at creating, an approved document so we can start with the training.
Personally, I'm fine with it coming back to consent, so.
Yeah, when do you think it would make sense then, if it goes to consent, if it passes? When do you think that it would then make sense to come back to policy committee to review what has been done in the classrooms?
Usually January of next year. Usually we like to, because we'll do training in the summer, then we'll do training with our teachers, and then we have, experiences at least for the half of the, school year that we can see, well, this training worked well, or these were questions we weren't anticipating. And so then we would review it mid-year and then maybe come back to the policy committee in January, because that way we'd have training and at least half year of implementing it. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense to me. And there were small changes, I believe, in regulation number 500 as well.
Yes.
Oh.
I just wanted to correspond,
Okay.
to make sure the changes flowed. And we can, once the policy's adopted, then we can get Dr. Albin then to review and approve the regulation. But we also have a superintendent's advisory council meeting where we review regulations at the end of the month, too.
So I think she's showing that for your reference. We do the policy, they do the regulation and so
Yeah.
forth. I think she wanted to kind of show you where it flows over.
嗯
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm comfortable with this going back on the consent agenda.
Okay.
I think a discussion point that, yeah, that I'll begin here and then, maybe we discuss with the rest of the board as well. I do think that there was interest, from the Racial Equity Committee in working with staff to kind of bring forth concerns and work directly with staff on where there can be changes or improvements. And I think there's ways that can be really effective. I think there's ways that with the Racial Equity Committee as one of our board committees that can be an effective way of bringing together folks to work on a new policy and move this forward. So yeah, I think I just do want to say I think that would be helpful in the future when there's a board committee that wants to do some work together with staff to create that opportunity.
Well, I looked at the charge of the Racial Equity Committee, and I do think it's part of the charge to review discriminatory, equity, bias-related matters, because you also gave us some very good feedback on a regulation, 300-1, that now we're reviewing in HR. We'll bring that to the Superintendent's Advisory Council. So I think that was the appropriate vehicle for you guys to review this and then submit it to the Policy Committee. And then you submitted the other to me because we would channel that, much like public comment or input from another committee that says, hey, as you guys are reviewing this reg, have you thought about this, or would you consider this wording? So now we're doing the same thing with what you submitted on 300-1, but that would take place at Superintendent's Advisory Council since that's a regulation.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that format worked well. The timing was a little, at the end of the game, but I think now we're aware and we know, and so I think that was well received. But as far as working directly with staff, I guess I would view it as my recommendation would be to channel it to the appropriate staff person to get it to the right committee, because if you had something on curriculum, that would be Dr. Cuppett with C&I.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I did go back to look at the charge saying, okay, how it's best to channel that. And Sabrina and I had talked a little bit about that process too, as far as I shared back with her to share back with the Racial Equity Committee, hey, this is on, we're talking about it, there are public comments posted, since she was the liaison. So I thought then that was the importance, of bringing Sabrina into the loop as well as the liaison. So I think it was very helpful.
Yeah. Okay.
Ms. Baird, did you have anything to add?
No, I'm glad this went through this iteration. I think I know it takes time to do the additional wordsmithing, but I think if everybody feels like their voices were heard, and I think that's useful. That's useful in itself.
The process worked.
Yeah, that's definitely good.
Yep. All right, anything else, Ms. Cannon, you need today?
I just wanted to thank the Policy Committee. I know this was not a scheduled meeting.
Right.
And I want to thank the Communications Department, because I know we kind of threw
Yes,
them off a
thank
little
you.
bit this morning because we are out of sequence. But because this was time sensitive and we wanted to keep it moving, so thank you very much for willing to come in for an extra meeting.
You're quite welcome. All right, with that, then we will stand adjourned.